almost like there was something there from the very beginning, and nobody knows why, because her family was self-respecting, and they did all the things that you should do to bring up a child and nurture that child and give them an education and all. But somewhere along the line, Assata just took that different path.
Well, don't you think that someone that has an above-average education would see the injustice in the?
They would,
yeah.
And they would question it, and they would try to figure out how they could change it.
Right.
And but you have
and
to
at
respect.
the time, see, I don't have to interrupt you, but at the time, it was. We know that there was a revolution in Cuba. Where it was a popular revolution where they overthrew a dictatorship. That people, with rifles in the street, were able to do so. And Che Guevara was going around trying to recreate revolution over South America. So there was this idea that we could do this. That it's possible with just handguns and rifles to resist and capture territory and establish our own territories and our own governments. So it wasn't all that far fetched at the time. Now forget it. It's hopeless. Forget it. They got drones. They got all kind of tanks. You can't even open your mouth without
Right.
trouble coming down on you. Resistance is futile today, although we must still resist. But at the time, it wasn't unreasonable to think that, hey, it was just done in Cuba in '59.
Well, and they could look around and see everything else. There was revolution everywhere, not just with the blacks, but the whites as well. They were fighting authority, but not to the extent that the blacks were. The blacks wanted. They just felt that they had been left behind, and they really need to establish themselves, whatever it took. And
at the time, too, not to interrupt you again, but we had the Red Army faction, the Baader-Meinhof gang in Europe.
Right.
So there was this type of this. This wasn't a unheard of tactic. That this wasn't a possible method to address grievances. At the time, it was, and it was popular too in Germany. The Baader-Meinhof gang was popular, and it's interesting too because you talk about how they were able to use fake IDs and stuff like that. It was the only reason why today that we have. You can't really create fake ID anymore. It's because of the Baader-Meinhof gang in Germany that they made everyone have a state ID in order to. That's how they were able to capture and decapitate the Baader-Meinhof gang. And like you said too, even at the prison back in those days, you can get on a plane. There were no metal detectors to get on a plane. You can go walk into court. There were no metal detectors to walk into court. So at the time, physical armed resistance wasn't inconceivable. It was something that was possible because you could capture ground. It was being done in Nicaragua. In El Salvador, we had armed resistance going on. So what is going on with Assata Shakur today? Is she still in Cuba?
As far as we know, she's still in Cuba. There until 2014, she was openly giving interviews, and in fact, you could just look her up in the Cuban phone book and call her. And then right after that, there's a rumor that Fidel became unhappy with her because she was doing so many interviews, and a lot of times she was expressing the poor conditions of Cuba, and he didn't like that. And I mean, he was giving her a free life, a free existence, and she was complaining about the water or something like that. So all of a sudden, the interview stopped. Also, about that time, the FBI and the state of New Jersey combined their efforts and came up with a $2 million bounty on. And so, at first, Assata it didn't bother her, but then when things started opening up between Cuba and the United States, many people in Cuba who hadn't realized who Assata is or that she was even there, all of a sudden started reading stories about her and that she was living in Cuba, and there was a $2 million bounty on her head. So not only now was Assata worried about the FBI or whoever from the United States capturing her, she was afraid that the Cuban people would turn on her, and because $2 million, they would do it in a heartbeat.
Sure.
And then I did get hold of a lot of newspapers that were printed in Cuba, and I talked to some of the people over there, and without any exception, they all expressed, of course, they would take the money. You know, if they knew where she was, they'd turn her in. So they have no love for Assata. They see her as someone who needs to come back to the United States and serve out her prison term, especially if they can get $2 million bounty. So, so there's that going on, and then people in Congress, Menendez and Senator Menendez, and of course Governor Christie and their Attorney General there in New Jersey, they're all trying to get her back. They want her extradited, and this is an ongoing thing. They haven't lost their passion for getting her back. It's just like it happened yesterday.
Hmm. How is your book being received?
It's being received well, and in fact, I'm in discussions now about a movie. It might be optioned for a movie. I hope it will be, because not just for me, but because it's such a fascinating story. And not only that, in spite of everything, all the things that Assata did, she is such a complicated and complex woman. And there's so much there that it makes a tremendously interesting story. The people that were hurt by her naturally want to see this resolved. They want her back, and they want her serving prison. And in fact, Trooper Forster's widow is still living, and she never remarried. And she brought up his son by herself, and she resents the fact that Assata is living a free life in Cuba, and when she's had to go without a partner for all these years. It's just an amazing story.
Now, your choice... I'm sorry, go ahead. You were going to say something?
No, go ahead.
Your choice of a title, A 20th Century Escaped Slave, how did you come up with that?
That is how she refers to herself. She thinks of herself as the 20th century escaped slave. When she finally started defining herself when she went to the community college and then later on into Berkeley, she really pulled on her roots, her African roots, and she resented the slave name Chesamard, and she was married briefly for a little less than 3 years, and that was where the Chesamard name came. That didn't go well, because she met him at the political rallies, and she thought they had a lot in common and in the same desires, but he had visions of having a wife who would cook meals and clean house, and Assata, if anything, she did not clean house, and her whole focus was on attending the rallies and attending these organizations and learning all she could and trying to do what she could to change society. So that marriage didn't last, but she, in her autobiography, she refers to herself as the 20th century escaped slave because of government persecution. And I'm quoting here. She says, "I was left with no other choice than to flee from the political repression, racism, and violence that dominate the U.S. government policy toward people of color." So best I can tell, she will always see herself that way unless she can make some more definite change. The amazing thing is she is making change, even now, because there are so many organizations that still evoke her words. The Black Lives Matter, whenever they have any kind of event, they read something that Assata wrote to start off the program. There are organizations all over the world that continue to support Assata. They're trying to get her amnesty or just anything to help her. But of course now she's 70 years old, so time's running out for not only her, but to get the prison sentence finished out, which I don't know if they're going to be able to do it or not.
Yeah, so many of these iconic names from the 60s and the 70s, they're so old now, and many of them, like I was just saying before, Leonard Peltier, just rotting away in prison with these weak cases, to say the least, and like Amnesty International and the UN, human rights, all in agreement that these people were set up and on trumped up charges. I'll tell you a real quick story, because we have a friend of this show here, Reverend Ed Pinkney, who was also from a reverend up there in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and activist his whole life. He was with the NAACP. He was with the Republic of New Africa, just like Matula Shakur. And never a violent day in his life, never committed a crime in his whole life. And he got arrested recently. He was trying to get a mayor recalled. And so he was taking signatures on a petition. And they arrested him because there were 4 signatures on that petition. There were 4 dates that were changed on that petition. And they accused him of forgery and to getting his mayor recalled. And he was sentenced to 2 to 10 years, 67 years old, sentenced to 2 to 10 years in prison. So it still goes on today. If you want to stand up for human rights and civil rights and for your fellow man, the machine will still tamp us down no matter what.
I know. Well, they're still fighting for her extradition, and one of the things that they are negotiating is we have in this country one of Cuban's people who was supposedly committing espionage for Cuba, and so there have been discussions for a swap. We give them this Ana Montez, who was Cuban affairs with the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. She's not supposed to get out of prison until 2023. So perhaps an exchange, we would send them Anna, and they would send us Assata. But, my own personal feeling is I'm not sure that she's even still in Cuba. Once that bounty became so well known, people started looking at where she was living and where she had lived, trying to find out information about her. And she's pretty much disappeared. I'm sure, and of course, Fidel, who was her supporter, he's dead now, and so at least Raul, and whether Raul will respect his brother's wishes to protect Assata is another matter. And some people think that they're keeping her under government control now. For one thing, they don't want her speaking out anymore, and then the other thing is just for her own safety. But there's also the possibility that he has already left. And I think back to those that night when, after her escape, and they were sitting in that room discussing where she should go, and they had mentioned China and Algiers and South America. And I'm just wondering, see, they had steakhouses in those places. That's why they were considering them. And so I'm wondering if she has already fled and has set up another identity in another country now. I don't know. The FBI and they say they still know where she is, and they still have under surveillance, but they won't say where she is. So it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, fascinating period of time.